Hello, my name is Matthew Taylor and welcome to our second Bush Broadcast webinar of the spring. And this week we're talking about technology in conservation. Now I'm joining you today from Bush Heritage's Redmort Field Station in southwestern WA, and you'll see a picture behind me of a wonderful rock shelter at our latest acquisition called Eddie Garup, which has been bought to help with some connectivity in this wonderful part of Australia. This is the land of the Kerang people of the Noongar Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to the Noongar elders, past, present, and future. Now, if you'd like to introduce yourself as well in the chat, please do. It's always lovely to know where people are coming from. Just chuck it in the chat, and if you like, also the country that you're joining us from. We'll be doing the usual thing, introducing three wonderful guests today, who are all experts in different fields of technology. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and we've got some time at the end to respond to those. So we're talking today about some of the different uses of technology in conservation, and there are many. You may well have heard of some of them or come across them, things like camera traps for seeing what creatures you've got out there at dead of night, using satellites and GPS positioning for tracking, drones who can do some wonderful aerial imaging and mapping and tracking creatures, right through to song meters, which can sit out in the landscape and remotely record the beautiful soundscapes that we don't always hear ourselves. Technology has basically become an essential component of conservation, and it enables us to do much better data collection. It increases our management and decision making and helps us in targeting what we need to monitor and how we measure impact. So investment in technology is something that also complements traditional conservation efforts, but it never takes away the need, of course, for on-ground management of our reserves, where we're tracking typical things like managing fire, looking after the creatures we have got, and getting rid of weeds and pests. But technology has a huge role to play in reducing the manual labor that's required to collect vital conservation data, stuff that in the past involved going out, as I did last week, with one of our ecologists to do bird monitoring, where you have to go out very early in the morning and stand in the cold and listen to every single possible bird you can. Now, we probably won't replace that, although one of our speakers today might have a view on that, but there's wonderful opportunities to actually improve our efficiency. So let's meet our speakers today. First up, I'd like to introduce Daniella Teixeira, who is one of our senior ecologists. She has a doctorate, and she also works in Queensland for one of the universities, but I'll let Danny introduce herself and her role. Hi, Danny, how are you doing?
Hi, Matthew, I'm good, thank you. And hi, everyone. I'd also just like to acknowledge that I'm coming to you today from Yugambeh country. I'm at home today on the Gold Coast. So yeah, I'm the senior ecologist for Bush Heritage's North region. So that's Queensland and the Northern Territory. And as Matthew said, I'm in this slightly unique position where I actually hold a joint role with the university up here in Brisbane, so the Queensland University of Technology, or QUT. So I have a research position over there and this senior ecology role on Bush Heritage. So I get to sit in this really cool and interesting sort of space in between academia and on-ground conservation. And that's a really funny photo of me. I look really concerned in that photo. That was just recently off in Yorker Reserve. But yeah, I'm really stoked to be part of Bush Heritage. I absolutely love working for this organization. And yeah, I just love being able to tailor my research that I do at the university to the stuff that organizations like Bush Heritage really need. The reason, I got into conservation in the first place was not simply because I love research or I love being in a university. It's because I really care about the world and the solutions to the problems that we face. So it's a really awesome job to have, to tailor my research to what really needs to happen and hopefully contribute to some solutions. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic, Danny. Well, it's lovely that you're on board, and I know we've got lots of pictures of you. Some of them a lot more flattering than that one, so we'll look forward to those in a minute. Our next speaker today is Justin McCann, Dr. Justin McCann, and he's one of our conservation data analysts. And Justin has come to us today despite being very under the weather. So thank you, Justin, for making it. And if his speech becomes at all slurred, it's because he's suffering from a bit of a cold. So thanks, Justin. Perhaps you'd like to tell us a bit about your work and your role with Bush Heritage.
Hi, Matthew. Yes, thank you. I'm coming from Wurundjeri country today in Melbourne, and my role as a conservation data analyst is really exciting. I get to help make a positive change on the Australian bushland, so it's something I'm really passionate about.
Excellent. And our third speaker is Colin Broughton, who's a systems developer with Bush Heritage. Colin, welcome. Love to hear what your role is and, you know, what it is that you enjoy about working with Bush Heritage, because you've been with us for a little while now, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah, thanks, Matthew, and hi, everyone. I'm joining today from Wurundjeri country as well in Melbourne, and I pay my respects to the elders. I'm a systems developer within the science and conservation team at Bush Heritage, and my background and training is in mapping, GIS, all things spatial. And for a lot of my career, I've been fortunate enough to apply these skills within the field of environmental conservation, which I'm really passionate about. And these days, my work is a bit more diverse. It's sort of drifted a little bit away from the mapping to some extent, but for the most part, I'm focusing on things like automation, for example, with the use of technologies like machine learning, which I'll speak a bit about today. And for me, working in GIS sort of provided a natural progression towards computer programming in general, and teaching myself how to code opened up a lot of possibilities. And I think our supporters are wanting to see their donations and contributions go as far as possible and have a significant impact on the ground. So with the use of technology and automation, we can continue to improve our efficiency and extend our reach further. And for me, working at Bush Heritage is really awesome because it's sort of that nice Venn diagram of like things I'm good at, things I enjoy, and things I care about. So for me, it's especially motivating to be able to see the direct impact of my work, and also just being part of an awesome team and working with wonderful people.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for joining us today, everybody. What I'm going to do now, if that's all right, is just ask each of you to a couple of questions about your work to give people a chance to understand, because technology is something that needs a bit of understanding. It's not, you know, necessarily immediately obvious. So let's kick off with Danny. I know you're working in acoustic ecology, which sounds grand and has been around actually for decades, but with technology advancing, the possibilities for its application are increasing, aren't they? Can you give us a bit of a sense of what you're working on and how that helps you study bird communities?
Yeah, sure. Where to begin? I mean, it's funny, I think before, Matthew, you said something about us being experts in technology, which is I find that a little bit odd, because I definitely don't see myself as that. Even though I use technology in pretty much all of my research, I definitely see myself as an ecologist or a conservation scientist who uses ecology, who uses the technology to answer questions. So I definitely come from an ecological background, and I've had to kind of adapt my research, or not had to, but it's been a really wonderful thing to be able to adapt my research to use these technologies. So I guess just for people's background, if they haven't come across these terms like acoustic ecology or acoustic monitoring, you know, what does that mean? And basically that's studying ecosystems or species with sound. So as simple as that. So you know, we're all pretty familiar with things like bird calls. Hopefully I can hear a bunch of birds outside my window right now. I'm sure you can too. And so researchers like me and ecologists like those who work for Bush Heritage, we tap into that as a source of data. So the sounds that are out there are actually data that can be converted into numbers that we can analyze and answer relevant questions. So fundamentally, that's what I do. And the advances in technology over the last really like 10 years, or even more recently than that, has allowed us to actually apply some of these concepts in monitoring. Before that, it was very difficult. So just for a bit of background, Matthew, you said rightly so that acoustics has been around for decades. It's actually been around longer than that. It's really a centuries old discipline. So bioacoustics is a term that has been used for literally centuries. You can go back to the 1700s, 1800s. And back then it was all about people studying the sounds that animals make, particularly birdsong back then, and particularly in sort of the Northern Hemisphere. So there was a lot of work trying to describe the sounds that animals make. And it's really cool. I mean, if you go back to some of those early papers, there's even, you know, this is the days before the tech. The tech was people's ears and you know, pens and paper, basically. So they were translating bird song into sheet music. Like, it's just incredible. Some of the old papers that I've been reading, it blows my mind. Nowadays, of course, we have computer programs that can actually generate sonograms or spectrograms, so we can do all of this stuff. But yeah, like I said, it's really the advances in the tech in the last 10 years, and what you can see on the screen there is one of the sound recorders that we use. So these advances have really allowed us to apply this in monitoring. So it's become more than just the study of you know, the sounds that animals make, but how do we actually apply that on a big scale to really capitalize on the ability to collect a lot of data over a long time and across really wide areas. So those are really the benefits that acoustics offers. So like you said, going out in the field, listening for birds in the morning as part of our, you know, spring surveys, that's all wonderful. And we need the expertise of people who know those bird calls and all of that. That's, you know, never going to be replaced by technology. But what sound recorders let us do is put a lot of devices out there that can capture sound when we can't be there, for instance, when it's too wet, or, you know, it's just too risky, or, you know, through the night. These are times that often we're not out there surveying for birds. So we can collect all of that data using sound. And what's really cool, and the way acoustic sort of research is going now, is trying to take a bit more of a holistic approach, I suppose, where we're considering soundscapes as entire entities of, you know, not just individual species, but all other things. So non-biological sound, even like wind and rain and all of this kind of stuff. So all together, if we consider all of the sound events in a soundscape, that can actually tell us a lot about the state of an ecosystem. So we call that ecoacoustics now. So that's slightly different to what I was saying before with bioacoustics, which was that really single species focused. So now it's what we call ecoacoustics, and it's a sort of whole soundscape kind of discipline, but very early days. There's a lot of us sort of working in this space and trying to make sense of how do we extract meaningful information from entire soundscapes? And when I say meaningful, it's, you know, what's relevant to conservation, what's actually going to help us manage systems better, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's pretty awesome. And I think the possibilities really, we're just getting started on what is possible with this technology now. It's very, very early days. So in 10 years, I'll probably have a lot more to say. So.
Thanks, Danny. You mentioned using bioacoustics for single species research. Can you give us an example of what you've worked on?
Yeah, sure. There was a few photos that were just popping up there of some black cockatoos. So I guess that's maybe a good spot to start. So I started working in bioacoustics when I went to do my PhD. So that was, I don't know, 7 years ago or something like that. So that's a photo there of a glossy black cockatoo on Kangaroo Island, which is one of the species I worked on in my PhD. So yeah, the aim of that work was to monitor breeding. And breeding in some populations of black cockatoo has been really difficult because the nests are, well, you know, if you even are lucky enough to find the nests, actually having the capacity to go out there and monitor them for the full 4-month nesting period to measure breeding success has been basically impossible, and it just hasn't happened. So in my PhD work, I basically set out to figure out if it was possible to do that with sound, so get some really, really discrete measures of breeding success. That actually started, like, you know, forget the tech. What I needed to figure out in the first place was what sounds do these birds make and what does it mean? So I spent years, it was a real privilege really to be able to spend a lot of time out in the field with these birds and getting into the intricacies of their language, so to speak, and just being blown away by the complexity of their sounds and the diversity and individual variability. They're so unique. Parrots are one of these. So cockatoos are parrots, and parrots are a group of birds that can actually learn new sounds throughout their entire lives. So we call that, in science, we call that open-ended vocal learning. So they actually can modify sounds and learn new sounds throughout their whole lives. So a lot of other birds only have this really sort of narrow window at the beginning of their lives that they can learn sounds. Cockatoos are not that. So I was just blown away by, that female sounds so different to this other female, even though they're the same species, and we can actually track individuals that way. So yeah, I spent a lot of years describing their repertoire basically, and then taking that knowledge and then applying that to some machine learning methods. So, or AI, that, is sort of the common term. But yeah, so we're building algorithms, well, we did build algorithms, and we're still continuing to build algorithms to actually track these particular calls that these birds make. And, very long story short, now we have these methods that we can scan our sound recordings through these algorithms, and it will kind of, spit me out a bunch of detections and say, hey, we think this is a cockatoo nesting. What do you reckon? And they're really good now. We can actually, pretty accurately measure when cockatoos are breeding successfully, and when they actually have a chick that survives all the way to fledging and joining the flock, which is, what we want to see. That's breeding success. And yeah, every year now I work with BirdLife and the Victorian government to track, over 100 nests of these birds, and it's just creating an incredible data set. And I guess like getting, this is all about the technology. This discussion is about tech. So the point that I think is really important, and I alluded to this earlier, is that I really come from in an ecology background and a conservation background. I don't see myself as a tech person whatsoever. Like that's not me. And I'm very happy to just work with other people whose expertise that is. So I think the beauty of my work and the position that I'm in now, where I'm actually at the Queensland University of Technology, is being really able to drive interdisciplinary research, where my projects are all co-supported by computer scientists and other people like that. So I work collaboratively with people from very different backgrounds to my own, but that's what makes these methods really powerful. So yeah.
That's wonderful to hear, Danny. And we've had a couple of questions while you've been talking about how people can get involved in the BirdLife bird count, which has actually been answered by one of our listeners today. So thank you for that. And yes, I don't think we'll ever lose the need to go out and actually listen as humans to the birds. I had the privilege of going out yesterday with one of our experts over here in the West, and it was a staggering just how much she could hear that I wasn't hearing at all. So she was able, with years of experience, the human brain can pick up stuff in direction and distance and get a lot of stuff that a novice like me was really struggling with. But I think the point with citizen science is that everybody can join in, and BirdLife have got a fantastic program there. So anybody who wants to, please go to birdlife.org.au to join in on that citizen science project. Thanks, Danny. That was fantastic intro to your world, and we'll come back with some further questions later. Justin, you have been tagged as our drone guru. I know it's not a title you necessarily wear comfortably, but you've certainly done some great work with drones and used this technology in your PhD studies, haven't you? Can you give us a sense of how you've used drones during that study work, and generally the broader benefits of the technology? Because I think people are hearing every day that Amazon are dropping parcels of their doors in certain test sites, and we're not particularly concerned about that today, but I know there's some very innovative uses of drones emerging in the conservation field, aren't there?
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Matthew. So I've used drones in the past to monitor waterbird breeding colonies, and to create an elevation contour map. And I've also used them to estimate the biomass, or the living weight of a plant. So there are many ways they can be used, as well as dropping off parcels. But largely what we're interested in the ecology, or the conservation ecology space, is how to use them to make our work more easy and more effective. So we have been using pretty cheap drones, and the idea there is that a tool that's really expensive is great, but limited use. So what I was able to do, and what we did with my research, is use a pretty cheap drone to replace a really labor-intensive manual effort. When we're doing conservation, what we'd like to do is measure change due to a management technique that we've been trying. So what I did here in this example is I measured the growth in a plant as a certain conservation action was happening. So I flew for 3 different species. We flew a drone above the plant and we took 200 or more photos of it. And it's definitely a lot of photos. But what that allows us to do is run it through a computer program. And that computer can look at the difference in perspective from each one of those photos and recreate a 3-dimensional model of the plant. Using that technique, I then had a 3-dimensional point cloud, so to speak, or a series of points in a 3-dimensional space. And I took away all of the non-plant material, so the ground surface, grasses, and neighboring plants, to just resolve a single plant in 3-dimensional space. Then using that 3-dimensional plant, I could overlay a convex shape over the plant to get an estimate of the volume of space that plant occupied. With the volume of space, we can make a direct relationship between the volume of space and the weight of the plant. And that weight will change with various management techniques. So for example, grazing. For grazing of long-lived species, the plant gets smaller as it gets eaten away, or if it's in a conservation reserve, it's able to grow. So we use that method to compare it against the traditional technique of using a ruler and measuring out the space using the height and 2 opposing width measurements. What we then did is we compared that against the gold standard, which is laboratory measurement. And the idea there is that we know that a new technology is going to give us a different answer to the existing method, which was getting out there with a ruler or a tape measure and spending countless hours in the field. But is that different measure a better measure? And so we used it to compare with the laboratory method, and it was a better method for 2 of the 3 species that we investigated. What that then allows us to do is make changes to our conservation efforts, and those conservation efforts, we can measure whether or not that's making a significant difference to the plants, the long-lived species in the landscape.
Fantastic, that's great. And how would you say Bush Heritage is planning to utilise this technology across our reserves? What have you got cooking up in the conservation skunk works of exciting projects for the future?
What the drones allow us to do is make a really high quality aerial image of the landscape. So we can use that to identify the areas for weed management and the effectiveness of weed management. We can also monitor the growth of revegetation efforts, such as in this slide here, through time. So it's a non-destructive sampling technique, so we can monitor growth without having to go and harvest plants to measure that accurately. And also what we can do is estimate the 3-dimensional volume of soil that's been eroded, for example. So where we've done soil conservation works, we can then monitor those conservation works after a rain or a flood event and monitor the effectiveness of the work that we've put in and measure whether or not that's had a significant difference on the soil erosion that's happened. So there's quite a bit in the works.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Justin. That's great to hear a little bit more about drones, because I know it's one of the things that everybody gets excited about, and I'm still about to buy my first drone. So it's you've encouraged me there. Right, well, let's move on to our third speaker, Colin. Colin, you're working in the world of artificial intelligence, which is when we say AI, and machine learning to create more efficient and effective data collection analysis, aren't you? And to improve our decision making. Can you give us a bit of an overview? I know you started that process at the top of the webinar. Give us a sense of how you're using technology in conservation.
Yeah, absolutely. At Bush Heritage, we do a lot of monitoring to assess the health of the reserves and the impact of our management actions. And camera trapping is one of the key monitoring methods that we use across most of the reserves. And it gives us amazing insights into the wildlife that's present on the reserves. And importantly, it allows us to answer important questions that help us to manage the reserves effectively. And one of the challenges with camera trapping is it just generates a huge amount of data. We currently capture millions of images every year, and we expect this to continue increasing over time. And all of that data has to be managed and stored. It takes up terabytes of disk space. And one of the contributing factors to the amount of data is that the cameras are triggered by any kind of movement, not just that of wildlife. So in windy weather, we get a lot of branches blowing in the wind. It causes the camera to fire, captures images. And in extreme cases, in really windy weather, that could be upwards of 90% of the images. And manually sorting through all this data takes a lot of time. And it's not a particularly enjoyable task for people to do. So these days we're using a technology called machine learning, which is, I guess it's a type of artificial intelligence to automatically process all of the images just to identify if any animals are present. And the computer can do this very quickly, say about 7 or 8 images per second, or about 25,000 images in an hour. And by reducing the number of false triggers, our staff and volunteers can focus on the more enjoyable and meaningful tasks of reviewing the images that actually contain animals. And as an extension to this, we're also working on training our own models to be able to automatically identify individual species within the images. And training a new model from scratch, it requires a huge amount of data that has already been sorted, so categorized into the species. And basically the model is trained by showing it example images of each species. And one of the challenges with this is that common species like kangaroos, they show up really frequently on the cameras. So we have loads of images of them, but rarer species or less common species only show up occasionally. So it's difficult to accumulate enough images of the less common species to be able to train the models accurately. So for now, we're focusing mainly on the common species, but that's in itself is a very useful thing to do because the nature of the data that we get, it tends to be maybe 70 or 80%, it's the same kind of five or 10 species. And then the remaining ones are animals that only show up occasionally. And the great thing about Bush Heritage is we have quite a wide spatial distribution of the reserves in different ecosystems across Australia. And we do continuous camera trap monitoring. And this gives us a huge capacity to gather images of different animal species and to be able to train the models. And that's exactly what we've been working on.
Fantastic. And I'd just like to mention that Colin's work there, Bush Heritage is always on the lookout for people who are willing to help with the identification of some of the critters that get caught on the webcams, aren't they, Colin? So
yeah,
if anybody's keen to do some desk research from home, please get in touch with us and our volunteer team will be happy to talk to you. Now, I'd like to go back round a little bit and ask some further questions and perhaps weave in some of the ones that are popping into the chat. Danny, let's start with you. Do you use similar machine learning in the world of ecoacoustics? Be great to hear what you've got coming up with Bush Heritage and what type of projects you're using bioacoustics for. And if I can sneak a quick question in, one of our listeners today has asked for a detailed example of how ecoacoustics gives useful information across a range of species in an area. So I know that's a bit of an advanced
There's
question,
a
but I
lot
thought
of
you might be able to weave it in. Yes.
You may need to remind me of some of those things.
Sure
Yes.
thing.
So to start with, yes. So the machine learning stuff that we do is very similar. Like Colin, that was an awesome overview. And I mean, basically swap out cameras for sound files, and that's essentially what we do as well. So I've spent a lot of my life over the last 5 years drawing little boxes on spectrograms, which is the way we visualize sound files, which is basically an image. Really, that's what it is. So it's like an image of what a sound, like a call, like a bird's call, looks like. And we build up massive databases of thousands and thousands and thousands of examples of their calls, and hopefully classify it into particular behaviors as well, and then train models on those. So that's basically the same as what Colin was saying for the photos. Yes, so I wanted to give a plug to the Australian Acoustic Observatory. This kind of relates to a lot of what we were saying. So the sound recorders you can see on the photo there are actually, that's photos from my PhD. So those are little small, as you can see, battery powered sound recorders. The Australian Acoustic Observatory, if you think back to the photo that was shown when I was first talking, which is the big box with the big battery inside it, that has a solar panel on the top of it. So those sound recorders, those solar powered sound recorders, there's about almost 400, I think, now across Australia. So that's part of this Australian Acoustic Observatory, which is a really, really big project led by QUT, the university I'm at, UQ, James Cook University. Yep, that's it. So that's a solar powered sound recorder. That one's on Charles Darwin Reserve, but we've got them on quite a few bush heritage reserves as well. So they're out there recording continuously. So just 24/7 continuous data. And it's the biggest network of its size, of its kind in the world. So it's really just an incredible source of data. The obvious question is, how do you deal with so much data? What do you do with it? Because we're collecting it, we're storing it on massive cloud servers, but what are we using it for? And that's where, it's all very new. The observatory has only been going for a few years now, and we're just starting to kind of get the data in a way that we can actually download it and analyze it and do stuff. But yeah, so a lot of my research and the research of my students is now tapping into that. We call it the A2O, the Australian Acoustic Observatory, the A2O data, because it's really the first time, as far as I know, where we've got actually like continuous data, say for a whole year. So we can actually get some of these trends in soundscapes over an entire year. So it's really, I mean, just incredible when you think about what we can do with that. In terms of what I've got coming up at Bush Heritage, so I'm sort of interested in this space, sort of in between single species monitoring and this whole ecosystem soundscape kind of stuff. And the reason being that I think projects at either end of that spectrum lose information. So at one end, you've got really detailed species information, which is great in the case of monitoring breeding and black cockatoos, fantastic. At the other end, you've got this ecoacoustics soundscape kind of stuff, which is awesome. You can get these really big temporal patterns, and you can probably see how things change through time and whatnot. But I think it's it just kind of reduces the sound data down to a level that we lose a lot of the biological information. So to me, that's getting a little bit too far down the technology will save all of our problems sort of mindset, and we're losing that knowledge that we ecologists have, and why did we train in animal behavior and all of that. That's what I'm trying to bring back into acoustics. So let's forget about the hype of the tech and just remember that first and foremost, we're ecologists and conservationists just trying to answer questions. So my work is really now trying to kind of bridge that gap a little bit. And, an example of something we're just getting started with now is this new project on noisy miners. So great, there's a photo of a noisy miner, a familiar bird to most of you, I'm sure. So we've actually, at Bush Heritage, we've just started a new project on woodland birds. So I've just me and my colleague Courtney Melton, who's an expert on noisy miners, we've just launched a new project that will be looking at all woodland birds on the East Coast, but we're just getting started with a call recognizer for noisy miners. And the reason we're doing that is because, so noisy miners, just for, I'm certainly not an expert on the bird. There's people far more educated on their ecology than me. But basically our thinking is that noisy miners are a known indicator of degraded woodland communities. So just their mere presence alone can suggest that a bird community is, not in as healthy a state as it should be. So, at this point in time, maybe this will change, but at this point in time, we can't monitor every single individual species using acoustic AI. We're just not there yet. Maybe one day we will be. So we're trying to pick these like key indicator species. So species that either tell us that an ecosystem is in a really healthy state or in a really degraded state. Either way, it's really useful information. And combined is even more powerful. But we're just starting with noisy miners because we know a lot about their ecology. And yeah, so we're building some AI at the moment to track not only their presence, but hopefully their behaviors as well. So, and our thinking with that is that, just by noisy miners being an environment, what does that tell us? At some level, their presence will be benign. I don't know if that's quite the right word, but they're native. So it's really, are they there a lot? Are they being aggressive? Are they actually excluding those small birds that we're really worried about, those kinds of behaviors? So yeah, I think that's a really cool approach. So like the whole indicator species stuff is definitely where my brain is at the moment. And some of my students, so I have a new PhD student who's just started, and he's really interested in how we can use acoustics to monitor response to bushfires. So bushfires are a topic close to my heart. I was quite involved with the Black Summer bushfire response down on Kangaroo Island. And yeah, I'm really interested in how we can better monitor how species respond to fire before and after fire. So we're starting up in the Ainslie Uplands region. So that's where our Bush Heritage Yorker Reserve sits in that region. Oh yeah, that's a great map. So that's our Yorker Reserve there. So that's the Ainslie Upland region, which is, like a tropical savanna sort of ecosystem. So it is designed to burn, and we do a lot of, so we being Bush Heritage, so the reserve managers and others up there do a lot of fire management on Yorker Reserve, and it's really a really fascinating ecosystem. So what we're doing, or what we're thinking of doing, is trying to get some controlled experiments up there using sound recorders where we can measure how wildlife respond to fire management, so fire like prescribed burning, for instance, as well as, if there were any bushfires and whatnot, and what sort of we always talk about patch burning or mosaic burning, and some of these concepts from cultural burning as well. So how does that translate into faunal community condition, and can we use acoustics to monitor that? Because of course we can't always be out there when the fires are raging, and we can't be there afterwards when perhaps it's really flooded and it's not safe. So we have permanent sound recorders out there collecting this data. So can we extract some useful information out of that? So that's where a lot of our work is heading at the moment.
Excellent. Now, really quickly, Danny, you've recently been involved in the filming of a CNN documentary, Call to Earth, haven't you? Can you give us a very quick overview of that doco, and more particularly where we can watch it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so that documentary, Call to Earth, it was filmed a few months ago up on Yorker Reserve. That's a photo there of us. So that's me, Paul Hales, the reserve manager for Yorker, and Scott Van Barneveld, who's the ecologist up there. And Lucy, the dog, should be there somewhere as well. Oh yeah, I can see her face poking out down there. Yeah, so we were up there replacing some sound SD cards in our sound recorders, in those observatory sound recorders, and planning for some upcoming work. So we had this CNN film crew follow us for a few days, and they also came down to Southeast Queensland, where I'm based, and filmed a bit of my work on glossy black cockatoos down here as well. And you can watch it on CNN's website, so there should be a link that we can share. Oh yeah,
just coming into the chat. Yes.
Great. Yeah, excellent.
Great, thank you. So we got film stars in our midst. This is great to know. And I think there'll be many more in the future. Colin, I wanted to ask you next. You talked about the interface between technology and people. Can you give us an example of how your work on machine learning and systems is, supporting our conservation work on a particular reserve, just to help people understand how it's applied?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, machine learning, it's sort of like one of those disruptive technologies that kind of turns things a bit upside down, and it's really changed our whole workflow. And we are increasingly engaging the support of volunteers to help us process our camera trap data. And we're using an online citizen science platform called Digivol. And a big shout out to any Digivol volunteers on the call today. You're awesome and we love you. And your work really does make a big difference. And as previously mentioned, our standard workflow now is to pre-process the images using machine learning to reduce the number of false triggers before we upload them to Digivol. And this makes best use of the volunteers' time, because then they can focus on just the images that have animals in them. And more recently, we've been working on an enhancement to this workflow where we also crop the images to each animal detection. And this way, the volunteers can focus on just one animal at a time. And there's less risk of missing any animals that might be sort of lurking in the shadows or far off in the distance within the image. And we're trialing a workflow where we also use machine learning to using models that we've trained ourselves. We use those models to make an initial guess at the individual species, at least with common species. And we use the model predictions to then sort the images into folders by species. And the model gets it right most of the time, but it'll never be 100% accurate. So I guess there's a changing role for people where it's not, we don't necessarily need people to classify each image individually, but it'll be more of a role of checking what the AI has predicted and then making corrections to that where it's necessary. And it's actually a faster task to look through a folder that's mostly one species and sort of spot the odd one out. Where the AI has made an incorrect guess at the species. And as an example, we've trained a model to identify 12 common species found at Iradi Reserve in Western Australia. And during the training process, we test the model on images that it hasn't seen before to assess the accuracy. And this model, it's trained on a huge amount of data, and the accuracy got up to about 99.7%, which is pretty phenomenal. Although we have to keep in mind, in a real world situation, things are a bit more complicated than that, because we're going to get species showing up that the model's never seen before, different weather conditions, lighting conditions, all sorts of things. We try to simulate simulate the real world as much as possible within the model training by gathering data from different locations, different time periods, that sort of thing. However, it's still always an unpredictable situation when you're testing a model on data that it hasn't seen before. But a key point is that with the use of machine learning, we can begin to answer some important questions very quickly, which is really what we need for some of our monitoring programs and for our reserve management processes. So for example, at Iradi, we're doing active control of a number of feral species, such as cats and foxes. And we really want to find out as soon as possible what the response has been to a particular management action, for example, the release of some baiting. For example, we want to know, has there been a change to the abundance of rabbits or cats or foxes following this particular management intervention? And so we've been sort of fine-tuning our models to be able to answer very specific questions like this quite quickly, even though it can't identify all of the images of every species. But if we sort of get it working really well for some key species that we're really interested in for particular research questions or management questions, then that's really useful. So it means if we can turn around that processing in a short time, say within a day, then our reserve managers can make adjustments to the management programs that they're running based on this information. And for other questions, say relating a bit more broadly to biodiversity in general on the reserve, we're happy to wait a bit longer, and we relying on humans to get a more complete and a more accurate classification of those images.
Fantastic. Thanks, Colin. Well, listen, to wrap up the formal part of the conversation, I know, Colin, you and Justin are both on our technology advisory group. Can you tell us a bit about what that entails and what the purpose of that group is to guide us?
Yeah, for sure.
Justin, perhaps you can chip in. Yeah.
Yep. We've set up a technology advisory group with staff from around the country. And the idea there is that there's many uses for technology. It improves safety. It allows us to do work that monitoring work we haven't been able to do before. And there's a lot of needs from around the country for this technology. But also the technology comes to us, and it's not usually fit for purpose. It might take a research bit of work to try and modify a technology to work for us. So the idea of the technology group is to identify needs around the country of technology and also a desired result. And what we can then do is work with technology providers to identify where things may already exist, or to modify or even create new tools that allow our land managers to get the result that they want and that they need. Also, by working with this technology advisory group, we can identify hurdles or lessons learned from previous technologies and make sure that we're not going to make those mistakes again. And things we quite regularly come across are the remoteness of our reserves, for power consumption, for connectivity, for feeding data back into databases, but also the climatic extremes that our reserves provide us. They're all challenges for conservation technology. So by working with a group of people, we can make sure that a technology is ready to roll before we implement it in the field. And that really saves people a lot of time from having to do troubleshooting on each and every reserve. A few technologies that we've had come through the technology advisory group. Camera traps, for instance, are something that regularly gets raised. We also have identified a need to try and build a better picture of biodiversity from our drone flights. So often drones are used to count trees and also the size of trees, so the diameter of the trunk. But it doesn't tell us a lot about the biodiversity value. So we're working to try and build in those biodiversity values, like the structural diversity of a forest, for example, fallen timber, and species identification. So we're working on that at the moment. And also we're trying to develop a better understanding of soil and how soil health affects our conservation efforts. So we've worked with a research project at the moment, and also a technology building company to try and get a better understanding of soil and to make those sensors applicable in our remote environments.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad you're doing that job for us, gentlemen, with the rest of the team there. Thanks for that great insight into three different sort of elements of how we are using technology, and in many ways it's pioneering some techniques that are going to make our work ever better in the future. It does, of course, prompt quite a series of questions. So we have a bit of time for questions now. We've got some fantastic ones already come through. As usual, I don't think we'll get to all of them, but we will endeavour to follow up with people afterwards if we aren't able to do everybody. So let me kick off straight away. Question from Tim. which is about environmental DNA, eDNA, and perhaps the response ought to explain what that is, because that'll help everybody else on the call. Has the eDNA become a viable tool to help in mapping endangered wildlife in conservation projects yet? So I know that it is being used. Would anybody like to take a stab at responding to how much eDNA is actually being used in conservation at the moment?
Yeah, sure, I can answer that. At the moment, eDNA is being used on some bush heritage reserves. I happen to know that it was used on Naree Station in northwestern New South Wales on Budgety country. And what we've done there is we generally work with research institutions when it comes to technologies such as eDNA. The sampling is quite laborious. So essentially, to sample for eDNA, you need to be inside a hazmat suit, because if you put your own DNA into the sample, then it's quite a large amount that you'd put in. So it would skew the results. So sampling is quite difficult.
Sorry, Justin. Can you just explain what eDNA is for everybody? Because
sure.
I'm not sure it's a widely understood term. Yeah,
for sure. eDNA is environmental DNA. So essentially, you take a sample of water, particularly from a floodwater, for example, where the DNA of many different life forms will have been accumulated into a single substance, such as the floodwater. Then you analyze that floodwater to express the different DNA that exists in that floodwater, and you look for a particular species. You might look to see if there's been a species that's DNA has contributed to that floodwater. So upstream of the floodwater that you've collected, was there a particular species of interest? And then you'd be able to detect the presence of that species if it did exist upstream. And that's a very sensitive technique. What that would then allow us to do is modify our management. So if we knew that a particular species was present in the environment, but in a really low number, so we weren't able to detect it using our regular surveys, we might be able to adjust the way that we're managing our properties to ensure that the management is beneficial and suitable for the species that we've detected. Fantastic.
Thanks for that, Justin. Now, question here for you, Colin, I think is, and possibly Danny as well, which is, does our current state of knowledge around camera trap images and sonographs from the audio recorders, does it allow us yet to identify individuals of a species as opposed to the species? Now, I know that's really pushing the outer limits, but I'm interested to know that one, because that sounds like it will be a next step. So, Colin, would you like to go first on that one? Are we there yet for any species?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those technologies that actually sort of scales in both directions. So you can sort of scale it outwards and say, okay, we're grouping birds as a detection category and train a model to identify birds in general, and then maybe another one for mammals, another one for fish or something like that. But it scales in the other direction too. So if you're using a very intensive survey, say, an example might be, say, following around a group of chimpanzees in the forest or something like that, and you know each of them by name, sort of thing, and you're doing very intensive observations, recording thousands, maybe millions of images of this one group of species. And if you can tag all of this data and say, okay, this one's Fred, this one's Gary, or whatever, then you can train your model to identify individuals. And especially if there's distinctive characteristics about each of them. And yeah, as a non-expert, I can't tell the difference between individual, say, kangaroos or something like that, but there are very often there are distinguishing characteristics about each individual animal, and it's really about having enough data, and we're talking tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of images that's required to get down to that level of granularity.
Fantastic. Danny, did you want to chip in with an answer to that one from your birding experience? Because I know it's possible to identify individual birds if you already know some of them in the area.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, sort of similar to what Colin was saying, like if you know this is Bill and Gary, then that's great. We don't normally have those sort of databases, but there's another way of looking at this, and it does require a lot of research, and this is probably why it's not applied yet. I think we'll get there, but you can also just know that it's a different individual. You might not need to know that it's Bill or Gary, but you know that it's different to the last bird that you listen to, and yeah, so that's definitely a thing. What is challenging with some birds and probably mammals as well is that they may change their vocalizations through life, or almost certainly do. So even like if you think of human voices, me in my mid-30s, I don't sound the same as what I did when I was 10 years old, or what I will sound like when I'm 60. My voice changes, and so do birds as well. So it's that kind of stability through time that makes it difficult as well. But there's certainly vocal individuality. There's a lot of research on that. And yeah, where models or data sets have been built on particular birds, it's pretty easy to separate them. But obviously we don't know all the birds in a population. So I think we'll get there where we can at least distinguish different individuals from one another. We just might not know that it is Bill.
Absolutely, thank you. And maybe that starts to answer a question that came right early on in the webinar from Bruce, who asked, is there a risk? And he was applying it to birding, but I think it probably applies more broadly, that tech and artificial intelligence are going to advance so rapidly that people will actually lose the skills of being able to do as my colleague did yesterday morning and be able to pick species by sight and sound and do it incredibly well with years of practice. And I'd love to hear whether anyone on the panel today feels like that's something that is likely to happen, or is it actually the case that we're always going to need those skills to be able to validate, as Colin was saying, what the machine learning is telling you, and add a layer of knowledge that we can't necessarily expect machine learning to do. So the question really is, is it are we gonna give up? Is it like, shall I just give up trying to learn all the bird calls?
No, that we're lacking in people who have that knowledge. Like the way we build this AI is by people who have that knowledge. So that more than anything, that's what's lacking. But yeah, so if I think about the stuff that I do, I still manually validate every single thing that the machine learning gives me, every single detection that it spits out at me, although it's pretty good now. Similar to what Colin was saying, like precision can be over 98% for this stuff. But it takes a lot of interpretation to understand what that means beyond simply that it detected that species. And that's where that kind of knowledge of the animal's behavior comes into it. So the way I see this stuff is that it will point me to a position in a sound file and go, hey, we found the black cockatoo doing its thing, whatever. Then I go, cool, what is this environment? Let me listen to what was happening before this detection and after this detection. Is that bird interacting with others of its kind? Can I hear some juvenile vocalizations? Is it raining? Can I hear predators? It's that entire knowledge, I suppose, of the ecosystem that really gets you the data that you need. It's not, to me, again, like I was saying earlier about reducing sound files to a single number. It's kind of cool. You can have an app that can do that maybe, but I don't think that's conservation. And it's not certainly, for monitoring, we need to be better than that. So no, I think more than anything, we need people with good field skills and natural history skills. So bring on the bird call ID expertise.
Excellent. Colin, would you second that or give a contrary opinion?
No, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And if any volunteers out there are worried about getting replaced in the short term, that's absolutely not going to happen. If anything, it's the opposite. We've got plans to expand our use of platforms like Digivol quite significantly, because we need people with those skills to do that. Really, the thing that humans are very good at is making those nuanced observations that the machine learning is getting better at, but it's a long way off being able to replace that, what the human brain is really, really good at.
Indeed. Well, Justin, maybe one final question for you then about drones. A couple of questions have asked about how drones can be used for revegetation and reforestation, because I think this is probably referring to the ability to actually drones to drop seed plugs and help with getting a lot of plants into the ground. And there was another question also about how drones could be used for weed management. So that's two of the vital activities that a lot of our reserve managers spend a lot of their time doing. Can you give us a quick update on how drones are being used in those sort of two situations?
Yeah, for sure. For revegetation, drones are really good at doing a job where we consider it to be where we're unable to do that job currently, such as replanting in particularly dangerous areas to go. So replanting on a particularly rocky outcrop, which might be difficult to be carrying a large tray of seedlings along. There is a company, Airseed, who are looking into ways of planting by using a drone. So dropping a pellet that is preloaded with seed, and what that allows us to do is to plant somewhere where we couldn't plant before. So we are looking into that. We're looking at if there's particular areas on our reserve that need revegetation, that we'd be able to use a technology like that. And for weed management, there's, I suppose as well, there have been thoughts about, for instance, stabbing cactus using a drone. And what we've found with that is for the time and investment effort to get a drone that will stab cactus, for now, that's not been a priority for us. It's something it's a pretty heavy thing to carry. So it might be a ground-based drone that would do that. But we're pretty good at getting boots on ground and doing some land management. So for now, we're stabbing cactus and we're doing weed management by hand. But what we are doing is using drones to map the effectiveness of that weed management. So looking at before and after photography that was taken with a drone and determining whether or not our efforts have been successful. Fantastic.
Thanks for that, Justin. Okay, folks, well, we've come to time. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been fascinating to get some insights into what the many ways that technology is helping the wonderful work that conservation practitioners are doing on the ground. So thank you, Danny. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Colin, for joining us today and giving us some insights into your wonderful work. And I have a feeling we'll be coming back to you for updates as things progress over time. And good luck to everybody out there who may be suffering from floods. I narrowly escaped the floods in northeast Victoria in the last couple of days, and I know it's still affecting a lot of people. So stay safe, everybody, and look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Thank you very much. Cheerio.